By the winter of 1944, Japanese High Command knew the Pacific War was turning against them. In response, they began drafting secret operational plans to launch devastating surprise attacks directly onto the American continent. The primary objective was the Gatun locks on the Atlantic side of the Panama Canal. Destroying these specific doors would wreck American naval logistics, adding weeks and thousands of miles to the journey of any ship supporting the Pacific War effort. An alternate target was even darker. Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night was a plan to drop biological weapons, specifically disease-carrying fleas, directly onto the dense civilian populations of West Coast cities like San Diego. These strikes wouldn't originate from land bases or traditional carriers. They were designed to be launched from an invisible, untrackable fleet lurking just 100 miles off the coast, rising to the surface in the dead of night. The strategic logic was desperate but calculated. By crippling the American supply chain or triggering mass civilian casualties, Japan hoped to force the United States into a negotiated peace, securing the Pacific Ocean for the empire. The origin of this nightmare scenario dates back to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet. In January 1942, barely a month after Pearl Harbor, he commissioned a rapid feasibility study to figure out exactly how to bomb the U.S. mainland. He demanded a fleet of 18 massive submarines with a completely unprecedented range. They needed the fuel capacity to sail from Japan to the American West Coast and then all the way back without a single refueling stop. Furthermore, they had to be heavily armed. Each submarine was required to secretly house and launch at least 2 heavy bombing aircraft, with each plane capable of carrying a massive 1,800-pound bomb or naval torpedo. Up until this point, aircraft-carrying submarines only held tiny, unarmed scout planes for quick reconnaissance. Merging the deep-water stealth of a submarine with the heavy strike range of an aircraft carrier created an entirely new class of naval threat. To fulfill Yamamoto's requirements, engineers built the I-400 class submarine. At nearly 400 feet long and displacing 6,000 tons, it was more than double the size of standard American fleet boats. It held the title of the largest submarine ever built until the launch of U.S. nuclear-powered ballistic subs in 1965. The core innovation sat on the top deck, a watertight, cylindrical aircraft hangar measuring 102 feet long. To maintain balance, this massive centerline hangar forced the heavy conning tower entirely to the port side. To hide this giant profile from detection, the exterior was covered in a specialized experimental coating made from gum and asbestos, which was intended to absorb the energy of incoming enemy sonar waves rather than bounce them back. But building a submarine to act like a carrier came with severe operational penalties. The giant hangar and off-center tower made the boat notoriously difficult to steer underwater, forcing a constant pull to port. Even worse, it took nearly a full minute to dive, double the time of a normal sub, leaving it highly vulnerable on the surface. The aircraft assigned to fill that hangar was the Aichi M6A Seiran. Engineers initially tried to modify an existing carrier dive bomber, but the space constraints were simply too severe. They had to abandon that shortcut and design a bespoke attack aircraft completely from scratch. Fitting a high-performance bomber inside an 11-foot tube required extreme mechanical ingenuity. The Seiran's wings rotated 90 degrees on their hydraulic hinges and folded perfectly flat against the sides of the fuselage. The top of the tail fin folded down to clear the ceiling, and the entire undercarriage was modular. The heavy floats could be detached and left behind to save space, especially for a one-way trip. Once assembled, a 2-man crew consisting of a pilot and a rear gunner would fly the Seiran, hauling a single 1,800-pound bomb or a full-size torpedo toward their target. Designing an aircraft to fold itself up like origami usually ruins its structural integrity. Yet Aichi managed to maintain the aerodynamic performance and high speed of a sleek inline engine bomber despite the massive joints severing its wings. Even with the aircraft perfectly stowed, launching them was terrifying. Every minute the giant I-400 sat motionless on the surface with its hangar doors wide open, the entire crew was exposed to enemy aircraft. Piston engine planes normally require several minutes of high RPM running to warm up their oil and cylinders before takeoff. Underwater, this was impossible. So engineers pumped boiling water and preheated oil directly into the plane's engine block, while the submarine was still completely submerged. The moment the sub surfaced, the planes were rolled out and their engines started instantly. An 85-foot compressed air catapult mounted on the forward deck then violently flung the heavy planes into the sky without a runway. By completely eliminating the standard engine warm-up time, a highly trained crew could surface, assemble, and launch an aircraft in exactly 7 minutes. That tiny window of exposure was the single operational factor that made this entire massive weapon system viable in a combat zone. By June 1945, a fleet of these specialized submarines had finally arrived at their training grounds to practice for the Panama Canal strike. But the fall of Okinawa to Allied forces forced Japanese leadership to immediately cancel the mission. The task force was redirected to a much closer target, a massive cluster of 15 U.S. aircraft carriers anchored at Ulithi Atoll in the western Pacific. To give the planes a chance to slip past American gunners, the Seirans were painted silver, and their red Japanese roundels were painted over with American stars and bars. This was a deliberate violation of the rules of war, a tactic the Japanese pilots found to be deeply dishonorable. The deception continued even inside of their own ranks. Mechanics secretly removed the bomb release mechanisms from the planes entirely. The elite pilots weren't immediately told that their high-tech aircraft were turned into inescapable suicide drones. What began as an advanced strategic weapon meant to strike the American mainland had been hollowed out. Its final configuration as a disguised one-way kamikaze drone reflected the total collapse of Japan's empire. The fleet sailed toward Ulithi Atoll with a planned launch date of August 17th. But Japan formally surrendered just days before the submarines reached their coordinates. Ordered to destroy all secret weapons to prevent capture, the submarine crews fired their catapults one last time. They shot the Seirans directly into the sea below, with their engines completely off and their wings still folded. The massive I-400 submarines were soon intercepted by the United States Navy. After American personnel briefly inspected their towering hangars and stealth coatings, they towed the boats out to sea and scuttled them at the bottom of the ocean. Allied intelligence remained completely unaware of the Seiran until the war was over. Fortunately, a single unfired aircraft was recovered from the Aichi factory. Today, it sits preserved at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center. The I-400 and its origami bombers were an astonishing engineering feat, designed to project lethal force directly onto American shores. In the end, the most audacious naval strike force of the Second World War was defeated entirely by the clock.